Hello, everyone. Today is Thursday, March 24th, 2002. Effie Cowles, our president for the League, is not able to attend today, so I'm Susan Pipes, a League member, and I will be welcoming you tonight. Tonight is the League of Women Voters Annual Legislators Wrap-Up Meeting, and we are delighted that all of you have joined us. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted later on to all of our social media pages, such as Facebook and YouTube, and on our website. At this time, as I've already asked all of you to mute your microphones and remain so throughout the event. And when we invite you, the moderator, who will be Dixie Dunn tonight, we also ask you to use the chat feature to pose all the questions to our speakers. Please be considerate of our moderator and only post questions for our speakers in the chat box. Tonight's program is a follow-up to the meeting we hosted with our legislators back in January before the start of the legislative session. Many of you will recall that at that meeting, our guests were asked questions regarding our public education, renewable energy, state income tax elimination, broadband and voter access, among other questions. Tonight, we will hear the progress the legislators made on these issues during the legislative sessions. Before we get started, we'd like to announce some of the upcoming League events. So we ask you maybe to mark your calendars. All League members are invited to our State Council on Saturday, May 21st at 9:30 a.m. This convention will take place via Zoom. The Jefferson County League, West Virginia, Jefferson County will hold its annual meeting on May 18th at 7 p.m. This event will be held at the home of League member Lynn Whitmire and will be our very first in-person event for a very, very long time. If you're thinking about becoming more active with the League, please plan to attend this meeting. At this time, I would like to introduce our legislators. We have invited all 5 Jefferson County legislators in West Virginia to join us today, and we are pleased that everyone is accepted. John Doyle will be probably joining us a little bit later. Delegate Wayne Clark was elected in 2020 and represents the 65th Delegate District, encompassing both Charles Town and Ranson. Delegate John Doyle was elected in 2018 and represents the 67th Delegate District, including the eastern areas between Shepherdstown and Harpers Ferry. Delegate Paul Espinosa was elected in 2012 and represents the 66th Delegate District, including Summit Point, Middleway, and the southern parts of the county. Senator Hannah Geffert was appointed this past autumn by Governor Jim Justice to fulfill an unexpired seat in the 16th Senatorial District. This district includes most all points east of Interstate 81, including Martinsburg, Charles Town, Shepherdstown, and Shannondale. Senator Patricia Rucker was elected in 2016, and she also represents the 16th Senatorial District along with Senator Geffert. Please note that due to the redistricting last year, the delegate district numbers will change, and the delegate and senatorial district lines will move. When you go to vote this May in the primary, the delegate districts you see on your ballot would no longer be numbered 65, 66, or 67th. You will see either 97th, 98th, 99th, or 100th on your ballot. Because of our population growth, we will now have 4 delegate districts instead of 3. As for our senatorial districts, the number will remain the same. 16, and all of Jefferson County will remain in the 16th Senatorial District. However, the portion of Berkeley County, which is in this district, has moved considerably. I, Susan, will post a link to our League regarding all this on our League's website, our Facebook page, so you can see our new maps and more explanation on the district numbers. We also know that our representatives are usually very willing to discuss and talk to you about their own districts. The information will be shared because they also have this on the West Virginia state side with their contact numbers. And I'm sure that if they would like to give more information, they'll be able to do so. Tonight, I would like to also introduce you once again to our moderator, League member Dixie Dunn. She will begin the program with the League generated questions, and if time remains, she will invite you to pose questions to our guests using the chat feature. And thank you very much.
Okay, well, welcome. I'm so glad that you can attend with us this evening. Just for the heck of it, I did go on the legislative website, and I see where 293 bills were passed, and some of these are awaiting the governor's signature. But out of the 293, 150 of those bills were House bills, and 143 were Senate bills. And there will be a link to the legislative website along with some instructions. So if any of our listeners are interested in a synopsis of the bills that were passed, it's a good 14 pages. So I definitely commend you, and you guys have one heck of a job. So thank you very much for what you do for us. The first question that was submitted by our audience is, do any of you have any recent information on Delegate Danielle Walker? In regards to, I understand that she was walking the halls of the State House clad in body armor due to an extremely disturbing email sent to her from anti-abortion group in Berkeley County. Does she still have a lawsuit in the works against the organization? Any recent information would be appreciated. So,
Dixie, I'll take that.
Okay.
Danielle sat across from me in education, and we actually became relatively good friends. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the actual incident,
yes.
Yes, I'm sorry, happened when I was in Hershey, Pennsylvania with my wife. So I wasn't able to, but I did speak with her about it. And I think us talking about it is not a smart move,
Okay.
Yeah, she, after the incident happened, she did hire a bodyguard, which, I understand 100%. And I think we should just leave it at where it's at.
Okay, not a problem with that. Okay, another question is, will West Virginia be welcoming refugees from Ukraine, or will the welcome mat be withheld as it has been for Afghan refugees? Who would like to take that?
Well, I'll be happy to start. Yeah, I'm not sure how you pull up the welcome mat. I mean, we are an open state.
Right.
I mean, obviously, we're subject to federal immigration rules, and certainly would welcome any law-abiding citizens or refugees that want to locate here in West Virginia. So, I find West Virginia to be a very welcoming people. I know the members of the 66th district, and I think each of our districts here in Jefferson County, very welcoming. Obviously, all of us are just heartbroken by what we're seeing in Ukraine, and so to the extent that we could assist any of those families and providing refuge, I think all West Virginians would welcome that.
Okay. Any other comments? Go ahead.
Just to add to that, I happen to know that we did welcome Afghan refugees. Actually, I have a good relationship with Catholic Charities, and they definitely helped relocate some Afghan refugees here in West Virginia. I'm not really certain, the person who asked the question, why they think we weren't, but we definitely did that. I have not heard of a specific welcoming of Ukrainian refugees, but I do remember Governor Justice did speak to being happy to help if there were any Ukrainian refugees. So again, I don't think there's definitely any problems with welcoming.
Okay. I know I was reading online news where there was a family that had located in Wheeling, a Ukraine family and everything. So that was good. That was good to hear. This is a question for all of you too. It says, are you happy with the state of West Virginia at the end of the legislative session? I can't see how you could say no to that, but any comments would be appreciated.
Well, I'll be happy to speak to a few pieces of legislation that I thought were particularly big wins for the Eastern Panhandle as well as West Virginia as a whole. The first bill is House Bill 4008 that certainly Delegate Clark and Senator Rucker and I work very closely on. It's literally a piece of legislation that I've been working on since I was first elected back in 2012, when I first became aware that there was such a disparity in the way that our higher education institutions were funded. And I've shared this, I believe, on your forums in the past. You know, I really took that to heart and tried to, at first, just try to increase awareness of that disparity. And my big concern was that Shepherd and Blue Ridge Community and Technical College were last among their peers by a long shot. And so over the years, have tried to build awareness. And I know each of us in the Eastern Panhandle delegation has done that. And we've provided additional funding. We secured additional funding for both Shepherd and Blue Ridge. I can recall in one session a couple of years ago, we were able to secure an additional $2.8 million for Shepherd, another $2.5 million for Blue Ridge, and I think we've even added beyond that. So that allowed us to really close the gap between some of the highest funded on a per capita basis and the lowest funded. And that really set us up for where we are today, and certainly commend Chairman Rucker, Chancellor Tucker, all of our presidents of our colleges and universities who rolled up their sleeve, helped come up with a performance-based funding model that I think will well serve West Virginia, and I think really sets up Shepherd and Blue Ridge to do extremely well, because we all know that they're very high performing colleges and universities. So that was one bill. The other piece of legislation that I'll just mention very briefly is House Joint Resolution 102, another piece of legislation that I've been working on for, well, probably since 2015, when I was first appointed to the Education Oversight Commission, the LOCIA, the Legislative Oversight Commission on Education Accountability. And one of the things, again, I just was a little surprised when I learned this, but virtually every other agency of state government, when they promulgate rules based on legislation that the legislature has enacted, those rules must come back before the legislature for review and approval, just to make sure that those rules are in fact consistent with state law. We're very pleased, we're very lucky to have Chairman Rucker, who serves on not only LOCIA, but also our other rulemaking review committee. Well, again, I discovered soon after joining that commission that public education was the exception. And so what I can recall distinctly seeing some rules that were promulgated that I knew weren't consistent with a law that we had just passed, and asked our council to draw up an amendment to correct that, only to be told that that's not possible. And I was like, why is that not possible? We just amended a rule for higher education last week. They said, well, that's higher education. Public education, you can't do that. And I was like, so what do you do when the rule clearly doesn't match the law that we passed? And I was told, well, you can pass another law. And I was like, well, where does that get you? Well, anyway, House Joint Resolution 102 will put the question before voters this November to clarify that public education rules are subject to the same rulemaking review process as all other agency rules, and certainly believe that that will bring greater accountability for our public education system to make sure that the rules they promulgate are in fact consistent with laws enacted by the elected representatives of West Virginia.
Okay. Senator Rucker, do you have any comments?
Well, I obviously support, and I'm very happy for the two pieces of legislation that Delegate Espinosa pointed out. In terms of how I feel generally about the state of West Virginia, I will say that it was a great pleasure to work with Hannah Geffert, that took over for John Unger, and she was great to have in my education committee, and really learned the ropes very quickly. And I think it's great that Jefferson County has two women senators representing them in the Senate. And, you know, we definitely enjoyed working together. I also think that this legislative session, more than many others that have occurred since I got elected, really showed the House and the Senate working better together. So very often there's been, you know, just things, unfortunately, that communication breaks down and issues, and it's always kind of heartbreaking to see that happening, but you know, it's part of the process. But this year I thought that the House and the Senate and the governor, the different branches of government were working better and more cohesively, and I think you could tell there was a lot of bills that passed with overwhelming support, that were nonpartisan, and like I said, I really hope that that continues.
Okay. Senator Geffert, do you have any comments that you would like to add to that?
Well, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. Yes. The real work of the Senate happens in the committees. And what's very nice is to see that a lot of compromises worked out there. The reality is the majority party has control of really what happens. But I think there was a process that, for the most part, was fair and gave everyone at least a hearing.
Okay, great. Delegate Clark, I don't want to ignore you if you have any comments that you want to make.
I just think that the state of West Virginia is in a better place, especially with some of these folks have done you know, like Paul and Patricia, who have been there for several years, just working their tails off. And what some of the great things that we got done this year, you know, in energy diversification with, you know, geothermal and the rare earth minerals and things that are putting us in front of many, many, many other states. It's just going to reap dividends, you know, 5, 10, 15 years down the road that we are not anywhere near. You're talking about a $1 billion surplus. I mean, we're talking about that, you know, if these things go the way we're planning on, we're talking about $1 billion surpluses every year for the next 10, 15 years. And that's a great thing for the state of West Virginia. So, you know, great things came out of education this session. You know, great things came out of all the minor committees, but you know, for me, you know, I saw some just absolutely amazing things coming out of the Energy Commission committee as well.
Okay, thank you very much for that.
I forgot to mention the 5% increase in raise for state employees, which is a big thing, and the $10,000 increase in pay for state troopers. That is very important too.
Okay, thank you for that. I have another question here. Again, these were all submitted ahead of time. So these are not my personal questions. If they are, I will let you know. So unfortunately, sometimes I'm just the messenger. This one questioner asked, it is in the news over and over that 19 states have passed laws that chip away at or greatly reduce voting rights. I don't think that West Virginia is one of the 19. Can you clarify?
Well, I was very pleased to go ahead, Senator Rucker.
Sorry, I was going to say, I think I'm the only member of judiciary from our delegation in Jefferson County. But I was just going to say, no, I don't think we're one of them, although there were several bills that did have to do with the election, but mostly on just improving the process. And there was clarification for when we have situations come up like happened with last year in the House of Delegates. And I don't want to go into all of those details, but anyways, no, I have not seen any piece of legislation to chip away at voter participation.
I agree.
So I was going to say that I was very pleased to sponsor several pieces of legislation at the encouragement of the Secretary of State. Many of you may have heard either Secretary Warner or his deputy appear on local radio stations talking about a few things that they thought would truly help the process. And this is feedback that they had received from county clerks. And so one piece of legislation addressed a possible issue with the replacement of voting machines. And there was some concern that the way that current code was written, you could end up with machines that could actually be live on the internet. And I think that's a concern that a lot of Secretary of State's, other state election officials have, is that they don't want our voting machines or the tabulating machines actually connected to the internet. So I was very pleased to sponsor legislation, and it did pass both the House and the Senate. I would presume that the governor will sign it if he hasn't already. That would make it very clear that our voting equipment is not to be connected to the internet. Obviously, that safeguards our elections so that they're not subject to hacking. There was another little piece of bill, another bill that was kind of a little simple bill, but again, the Secretary of State's office came to me, and this deals with the 50-cent fee that you pay when you go to get your vehicle registration. And the Secretary of State's office made it very clear that while that 50-cent fee was initially intended to help with motor voter registration, I guess it's called, they were able to accomplish those tasks without the fee. They had other funds that were already available. And so put in a very simple bill that will eliminate that 50-cent fee. So the next time you register your vehicle, again, it's not a huge savings, but it was a case where an agency actually came to us and said, we can accomplish what is needed to be accomplished with this program without charging West Virginians an additional 50-cent fee. So very pleased that as a result of that legislation passing, the next time you renew your vehicle registration, you'll no longer be assessed that additional 50-cent fee. So pretty simple little piece of legislation, but I think it just is in a direct response to feedback that we got from the Secretary of State's office.
I appreciate that, and welcome, Delegate Doyle. We're so glad that we do understand that you had a previous engagement, and we do appreciate you still hanging in there and joining with us tonight. This other question, and you may have kind of touched on it, but this next question is asking if the Secretary of State's office is still purging the voting rolls, and have they done anything else to limit voting rights?
Well, I think the question, presupposes that trying to keep our voting rolls accurate is a bad thing. And I certainly don't think that it is. I think one of the issues that Secretary Warner identified when he came into office and started working with our local county clerks, including Clerk Jackie Shadle here in Jefferson County, is that a number of the counties had voter rolls that did have considerable number of voters that had not voted in a significant period of time, that were, based on current law, really should have been purged from the voter list. And I think my understanding generally of that process is to try to prevent a situation where you have folks that are no longer even located in West Virginia, or have not voted in maybe a decade, to not have those voter registrations still on the books that could be susceptible to someone actually engaging in voter fraud. So I think that is a healthy process, and I think if you talk to Secretary of States around the country, both Republican, Democrat, I think they'll tell you that that is a healthy process to go through. And I certainly commend Secretary Warner, but particularly our county clerks, both Republican and Democrat around the state, who have done, I think, a pretty good job of trying to get our voter rolls up to date, so that we don't have people registered to vote here in West Virginia who don't live here in West Virginia.
Right. Okay. Delegate Doyle, you're on mute. If you can unmute yourself.
I thought I had. Thank you.
There you go. No, you're fine.
Paul's right to an extent. People who have that haven't voted for election after election after election after election, it's important to catch up on them. But I think Secretary Warner's gone overboard in the opposite direction. There are a lot of people that only vote, for example, in presidential elections. They don't vote in the non-presidential year. I wish they would, but they don't. There's some people who will miss a presidential election now and then. So even to go 3 elections in a row, that may be a person who's still valid, still alive, still should be registered. And we have to remember, you have a right to vote, but you also have a right to not vote in an election if that is your choice. I wish everybody would vote in every election. So I think we have to be very careful about how we go about doing this. And I think Secretary Warner has been, shall we say, a bit overzealous trying to get these rolls cleaned out. We end up losing people that shouldn't be eliminated from the rolls.
Okay. Senator Geffert, do you want to comment on this, or?
Yeah, I agree with Delegate Doyle completely. You know, the fundamental right to vote is so basic to our democracy, and we should be encouraging people to vote and not making it so difficult for folks to vote. Now, I think we're lucky in West Virginia. We haven't had the 7-hour lines or anything like that. So our elections have been run fairly well, but it's also because it's so overwhelmingly a red state. Now, I'm not sure, like for our senatorial election, when it's very close, I think that becomes a little different in how careful sometimes the Secretary of State is with the voter numbers.
Okay. Any other comments from anyone? If not, I'll move on to the next question. Yeah.
I'll just add one quick thing. As someone who just recently came off a very important election, I can tell you that having up-to-date, clean voter rolls is really helpful as a candidate. Yeah. There are many times in which I pointed out to Jackie Chadle that there were people registered to vote at home that had, the homeowners told me, no, they moved away 5 years ago. So in our area, especially, our biggest issue is we have a lot of turnover. We have more people moving in and out than most of the other areas in West Virginia. And I think it is very important to do a cleanup and to make certain that we have folks who are legitimately here and can legitimately vote in order to help manage the whole election, but even more importantly for us candidates who are trying to meet those voters, to know who those voters actually are. So I can tell you that I never heard from any constituent who was legally registered to vote and was purged. I haven't heard of a single incident of that, but I have heard from many who tell me, I'm getting mail for someone who moved away many years ago, and what can I do about that? So I commend the work of our county clerk and also our Secretary of State. They have a very challenging job, but it's super important.
Okay, thank you. Just don't want to overlook anybody. Did you have any comments, Delegate Clark? Okay, fine, great. I just don't want anyone to feel slighted. Okay, this next question says or asked, was freedom of speech curbed, or will it be curbed due to laws passed in an attempt to regulate or control the teaching of history in West Virginia classrooms? Or is it being decided at the county level by boards of education?
So I'll start off with this.
Okay.
So I sat in education for 2, and so did John. 2 bills relating to what you could say or not say is critical race theory. And I actually spent a good amount of time on the radio with WNRNR radio. And I want everybody to understand, critical race theory as a program or a curriculum is not being taught in our schools, because it does not, there is no critical race theory curriculum in high school. The bills that we presented were specific in telling or directing teachers that you cannot teach racism. You cannot teach that one person is more superior than the other. You cannot teach that one is under-deserving versus another. We're all the same. And that's what we're trying to do with those two bills. Now, neither one of them made it to the finish line, you know, but I would not be surprised if it does not come again in the next legislative session, you know, but there's a big misunderstanding that we're trying to take away the teacher's right to teach history. We're saying you cannot teach that someone is superior to someone else just by their color of their skin, their religion, the fact that they have webbed feet or they don't have webbed feet, or they have 4 fingers on their hands or 5. You cannot teach that there is a difference and they're more superior than others. That is what both of those bills presented. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
Any
you.
other comments? Go ahead, Senator Rucker. Go ahead.
Yes, I just want to say, like, it's really funny because most of the folks who were writing in opposition to those pieces of legislation had not actually read the pieces of legislation. So I think there was a lot of concern because they had heard of bills being done in other states that were not what we tried to do here in West Virginia. And when I actually pointed to them to what was actually in, like, for example, Senate Bill 468, they were like, oh, yeah, well, no, I'm not opposed to that because it's just common sense, as Delegate Clark was saying. I also want to point out that in terms of curbing freedom of speech, which is the question started off by saying, so freedom of speech does have some limits. We're not allowed to yell fire in a crowded movie theater. We do have things that it is inappropriate to say. And even though someone may have the right to say it as a personal opinion, we do say that, for example, educators can't say these things, or police officers are not allowed to say certain things as a duty of their job. Politicians, when they're campaigning, like, we have laws that say you're not allowed to say certain things in your campaigns. So there are some restrictions that are common sense. And the reason for those restrictions are in order to ensure that if you're representing something, like I am representing Jefferson and Berkeley County as the state senator for your 16th district, that I stay within certain ethical rules and boundaries. Now, as an individual, I can say what I feel myself, but I have to make it clear that it's not as your spokesperson, for example. Right. Educators in the classroom, they definitely are representing the state of West Virginia and public education. And so it is actually not a curb of their personal freedom of speech to be able to tell them, this is a line that we don't think you should cross when you're educating kids. Now, you want to go home and you want to say it, or you want to post it on your personal social media, but in the classroom, there are some restrictions. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
No, and I definitely appreciate that. Anyone else have any other comments before I move on? Okay.
I do.
Hey, Senator Geffert, go ahead.
Yeah, but ultimately, at the end of that bill, we affirm the right that teachers have freedom of speech, and that we treat our teachers, or we should treat our teachers, like the professionals they are, and understand that they have, most of them on most days, have good sense, and we have to trust them as the professionals they are and not make them the enemy of education. They're not. They're the core of education. And most of our teachers have good common sense. That's not to say all of them do, because not all of anything is perfect.
Right.
But I think we have to remember that teachers are professionals. They work hard at their trade, and they need to be respected.
Okay. Delegate Doyle, go ahead. You got a comment?
Yeah. I've come to believe that the state probably, the legislature probably should act in this area at some point in the future. But none of the bills we had, I think, got anywhere near solving the problem. Every single one of them, every version I saw, started out with to teachers. here is what you must not do. But there was no follow-up saying, here is what you may do. I don't want to end up with teachers being intimidated to the point where they whitewash history just to make sure that they don't get into a topical area where they accidentally say something that hurts somebody's feeling. We should be very careful not to do that. But race is part of the history of the United States, just as the free enterprise system is part of the history of the United States. You can't teach the history of the United States without talking about capitalism. I think I could call that critical capitalist theory. You can't teach the history of the United States without teaching democracy. Right. That's why we became a nation, a large part of it. We didn't want the king to be in charge. I call that critical democratic theory. You can't teach the history of the country without including that. And freedom of religion was one of the foundations of this country. A whole lot of people that came here didn't like the idea of the king establishing the religion to which everyone must adhere. We wanted freedom of religion. I call that critical religious theory. We have to teach all of these things, and we have to do it in such a way that everybody understands that this is a hard-nosed history of the country, which has become, in my opinion, the most significant nation in the history of the planet. We all need to know how we got there. And we're not going to get there by whitewashing history. When I studied West Virginia history in high school, there was a book that never mentioned John Brown, never mentioned Bill Blizzard, never mentioned Mother Jones. We can't go back to that. And I think the way we get to where we need to be is when we come up with these bills, don't just, some of you conservatives get together and say, hey, this is what I think we ought to do. I think many of you are well-meaning, I'm serious. But include a large portion of the African-American community, include a large number of teachers in this, and come up with a way to phrase this that the teachers realize that they're not being told, you better stay away from the topic lest you accidentally say something somebody doesn't like. So there.
Well, I mean, I think, history is basically the story of what has happened and what has happened in the past. And unfortunately, we can't rewrite history. I think we all need to learn from history and move on, not try to erase, what happened. And that's just my couple of comments.
Can I?
So
can I
Dixie,
follow
if
up?
and I'd like to
Okay.
have an opportunity too.
Sure. I'll get to you in just a minute, Senator Rucker. Go ahead. Delegate Espinosa, go ahead.
So I think Delegate Doyle's comments are, I think, perfectly illustrate or fairly closely illustrate exactly what Senator Rucker was saying when she says that how some of this legislation is being characterized does not match what the law actually says. And so if I may, just very briefly, let me share the pertinent portion of the legislation that actually passed the House. It says a school district, a public charter school, the West Virginia Board of Education, the West Virginia Department of Education, or any employee of the aforementioned entities within the scope of his or her employment may not require or otherwise compel a student, teacher, administrator, or other employee to affirm, adopt, or adhere to any of the following concepts. So these are the concepts that are prohibited. It's not talking about you can't teach history. These are the concepts. And I would ask you, which of these concepts do you think teachers and students should be forced to adhere to? One race is inherently, morally, or intellectually superior to another race. That would be prohibited under this law. I would hope everybody would agree with that. An individual, by virtue of the individual's race, is inherently racist or oppressive, whether consciously or unconsciously. I hope we could all agree that that's not appropriate. Number 3, an individual should be discriminated against or receive adverse treatment solely partly because of the individual's race. I hope we would all agree that that's not appropriate. Number 4, an individual's moral character is determined by the individual's race. Again, that just obviously goes against what we've been taught to treat people based on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And finally, an individual by virtue of the individual's race bears responsibility for actions committed by other members of the same race. Again, I hope that everyone would agree that is not appropriate to compel a teacher or a student to do. So that's what the bill actually says. It doesn't try to whitewash history. It basically says that these 5 items should not be something that a student or a teacher or an administrator should be compelled to do. So that's what the legislation actually says. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rucker, go ahead.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Delegate Espinosa, for reading the actual legislation. Again, I understand folks' concern. I understand that it's hotly debated around the nation. I just want folks to please read the actual legislation that we were considering in West Virginia, not just what they read on Newsmax or some article about something that Texas and Arizona did or whatever. We truly did work together. And as Delegate Doyle suggested, I can tell you, I gathered input from teachers from both higher ed and K-12 and State Board of Education and HEPC. And it wasn't just like one little project done very quickly. It's something that it was months of working and negotiating. And as a history teacher, I truly passionately care about teaching history accurately and including the bad and the good. Like, it has to be balanced. But what some folks are concerned about, and this is what I said in defense of the bill when we were considering the Senate, what some folks are concerned about is just that we want to make certain that we never have a child feel guilty for being whatever race they're born. Like, that's not something they controlled. And I don't want an individual, being an employee or anybody, to be forced to admit to something that they never felt. Like I have heard is happening in other places, and thank goodness not hearing about it happening here in the state of West Virginia. One of the most important things about the piece of legislation was that there was going to be a reporting mechanism, so that if folks felt that this was happening, they knew who to call to get it addressed, and it was going to hopefully diffuse a lot of this tension, because we'll know if it's a real issue or not. And I certainly do not think it is a huge issue, thank goodness. So anyways, as Delegate Espinosa said, it didn't make it through, and I don't know what, if anything else will happen, but I do appreciate folks taking the time to actually read the legislation and what it actually says versus what they hear about in other places.
Right.
Thank you.
And go ahead, Delegate Doyle.
I think a lot of what Senator Rucker said is right, but I do think there needs to be more consultation with our classroom teachers, not so much with the higher ups, the State Board of Education and Higher Education Policy Commission. And I know Senator Rucker tried to go way beyond them. I don't think and maybe it was because there weren't very many people trying. I don't think we went far enough. I read every single word of all 3 versions of this that I saw, and I don't think any of those versions was going to work. Yeah, I know it was not an attempt to intimidate teachers into staying away from topics, but I'm convinced in all 3 of those cases that would have been the effect. And I think we get by this not just by including more educators, but also including a lot of people from the minority communities in coming up with something. And so I think it probably needs to say not just here's what you can't do, but specifically here's what you can do.
Right.
That's just the way I'm looking at it.
Okay. Senator Geffert, do you have any comments?
Yes. I actually taught this stuff but at the college level.
Right.
And I think you have to be sensitive that, and actually Senator Rucker and I somewhat agreed on this, that sometimes learning is painful, and that you can't just say, well, this topic is going to be treated so delicately that nobody will feel the pain. Let me give you an example. I was really good at math. I hit calculus. I could not picture it. It was painful. It was exceedingly painful to try and learn that. But I think particularly issues of race, religion, we took all the other stuff, sex, gender issues, we took all that other stuff out of the bill as it was being developed, and it ended up with race. And it is, you know, it is the piece of our history that has been the most difficult and painful to deal with, because some really horrible things were done, not just to Black people, to the Irish, to the Italians, to the Jews. There were, whoever the last group is, the Koreans, whoever the last group in seems to have to go through this trial by fire. And the other thing you'll notice is that in all these different ethnic groups, they always set up their own institutions. If they're kept out of a college, they set up their own college, Notre Dame. If they're kept out of the medical profession or having hospital privileges, they set up their own hospital system, Albert Einstein hospitals. You know, each group manages to find a way to participate in this country until whatever the difference is that people were so focused on doesn't really seem that relevant. And I think that's part of the beauty of our country and something we should teach to our children, not just where we were, but where we're going, where we are now.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for your comments. Okay, moving on to the next question. The question reads, were any laws passed or regulations approved that would serve to prevent another rock wool from permanently damaging West Virginia, one of the most beautiful places on earth?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Well, that sums it up pretty well. This
It's partly a constitutional issue too, because you really can't do anything to hurt the extraction industries in West Virginia. That's like gospel. So.
Okay. Thank you for that. Was anything done, regulations, laws, or whatever, to strengthen the State Department of Environmental Protection in the just ended session?
A little bit. We did pass a law that gives them a source of revenue to hire some additional inspectors. But I think they need a lot more. They're way understaffed, but this bill helps them some.
Okay. Any other comments? Okay.
Donna, I'm not sure if you were referring to legislation that I introduced, but I did introduce a piece of legislation along with Chairman Bill Anderson and Vice Chairman John Kelly that does provide an additional revenue stream for the DEP, specifically in the area of air quality that would allow them to retain an additional revenue stream there. That was something I believe the DEP had advocated for. Co-sponsored that legislation last year, didn't quite make it, but I believe, and I'd really have to go back and double check, but I believe it did make it through both the House and the Senate, and I would presume that the governor will sign that if he hasn't already.
Yeah, that would be the one, because I remember it was specifically air quality. The problem is that in terms of water quality and also of pipeline inspection, the DEP is still way understaffed, and we need to find a way to beef those up as well.
Okay, thank you for that. Senator Rucker, were you going to add anything to that?
I was just going to add that we also finally passed some of the rules that have been over a year in negotiations in terms of updating our water quality standards, and especially the water quality standards that have been, oh my goodness, months of negotiations and discussions and stakeholder meetings, and those finally did get approved.
Okay,
it increased our water quality standards. I think 17 out of 24 increased in terms of strictness, and 4 remained the same, if I remember correctly.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, and also if I could add on that, Senator Rucker triggered my memory here. We also, for the second year in a row, were able to defeat the bill that would further weaken the above ground storage tank bill. So I was really happy about that.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Okay, another question here says, there is talk of a Bitcoin mine in West Virginia. Do you have any information on this? Would such a mine be a good thing or a bad thing? And would it create many jobs, or would it be another entity that permanently, and we're just talking about this, contaminates West Virginia water resources?
Beats me.
Okay.
Listen,
Okay.
I'm a klutz when it comes to technology.
Mhm.
I really don't know what Bitcoin is and what it does. So I'm sorry. I can't. Other people are going to have to deal with this.
Okay.
I'm with John on this one. I thought Bitcoins were in computers. I didn't know they were actually in the ground. How does it affect our water?
Not in the ground. But we do have some rare minerals here that, like much of the wealth of West Virginia, we have to hope that this is exploited in a way that actually benefits the people of West Virginia, and that all the wealth isn't taken out of the state, which has happened with so much of our natural resources.
Okay, great. Well, this is why we're here. This is an education for all.
So
Okay.
Dixie, just
yeah.
briefly back to the first question. There was a cryptocurrency bill, which I think is somewhat related, but perhaps somebody could correct me there. But it did not quite make it out of banking and insurance.
Okay.
However, my understanding is it is a topic that we have identified for study during our upcoming interims. So during the interims, which actually will begin next month and will extend most months until we're in session again next January, we do plan to study that topic to better understand what regulation, is necessary and helpful in order to, properly regulate, and to the extent we want to foster that industry, be able to do so.
Okay, great. Thank you. Delegate Clark, this question was specifically requested of you. The question reads, what was your reasoning behind House Bill 4844? It appears this bill would have hurt students with disabilities severely. It attempted to do exactly what insurance companies have been able to do to patients: eliminate the doctor in making medical decisions. For example, children with anxiety, etc., often need a small class environment, extra time. Allowing someone from the board office to write a plan would turn into may take breaks as needed. Can you see the difference? Yes, some accommodation is offered, but it removes support from a teacher or staff member, doesn't modify a test, etc. Before you answer, just want to state the questioner also says, I do appreciate all that you are doing and just hope that you will not rely on a single source for input, if that is the case here.
Okay, so I assume they're talking about the 4844, which is the I called it the Chapter 18 study. It's one of the things that I worked on throughout last year's interim session. And in that section, there was a part that addressed who is responsible for writing the IEP.
Right.
Right. And what we found throughout different town halls throughout the state is a lot of times the teacher is asked to write the IEP. Now,
before you go on, just for some of our listeners, would you define the acronym IEP and what that stands for?
That's individual education plan. It's enhancements. It's for maybe a student who has some autistic traits. Maybe they're severely autistic, or maybe they have dyslexia or some sort of reading issue. They vary from minor to major.
Okay.
So what we found is that traditionally, in other states, each school has a special ed coordinator who their job is to monitor those students that have IEPs. Okay, so what we tried to do with that part of that bill was take away the actual writing of the IEP from the teacher who may not be proficient in the special ed stuff, and put that on to that individual who is a special ed specialist for that school. There was also a clause in there that if that school did not have the special ed specialist, then the teacher may be required to write it. The main thing is that some of these IEPs, especially in the 3rd grade when they're first introduced, can take anywhere from 1 to 2 hours to write. And the detail that is involved with that, you have someone who's not necessarily proficient in how to correct or teach dyslexia reading, as an example. That is a specialist position. Now, the teacher's still involved in the identification, the teacher's still involved in all of the meetings with the principal and the parents. So again, I'm thinking there's a little misunderstanding of, that this was going to have any kind of limitations on anything. Ultimately, the bill never went through, and Patricia Rucker and I spoke specifically about this part. And we're going to do some work on this part throughout next year, and hopefully maybe reintroduce it to where it kind of clarifies a little bit more. Sometimes when you have an idea in your head and an idea on paper, and then you put it to an attorney, sometimes those things get a little kind of iffy. So by all means, this was not going to be, the intent of this was not to have a negative impact on students who have IEPs. And also that bill unanimously passed education and unanimously passed the House floor. So but
Can I say something about IEPs? IEPs aren't just for children who have some learning disability. It's also for children who excel. So if you have kids who are
very true.
2nd grade and already can do algebra, they try and set up a situation where their education is continuing. They're not doing 1 + 1 because they're way past that. So it works at both ends of the educational process.
Very true.
Okay. Well, you know what? I cannot believe that the time, we've had some really good questions, and I really appreciate everyone's comments on here. We still have some questions that we didn't get to. And if any of our listeners have questions that they want to submit via the chat, we will forward those on to you, just so you know what your constituents are thinking and what they're interested in. But I do want to take this time to, again, thank each and every one of you for what you do for us. I don't think anybody, unless they walk in your shoes, can truly appreciate what it is that you guys do. Like I said, just going to the bills that have been passed was a real eye opener for me. That I don't see how you guys do what you do in the amount of time that you do it. So again, thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules away from your families to join us for an hour, to educate us and to let us know where you stand. So to each and every one of you, thank you again for what you do for us.
And thank you.
Okay. Thank you. It's always a pleasure. I always learn so much from these. And this is what the League of Women Voters does try to do. We're here to educate. So I hope none of you feel, and we try not to put you on the spot. We try to be considerate of feelings, but we want this to be
Trixie, we're always on the spot, all of us.
Well, listen, with that, have a good evening, and thanks so much for attending.
And properly so.
Okay. Good
Thank
night now. Good night.